Good day to you. It's a full moon, May 10th here, a Saturday, where Anagalactic was just able to finally test, with a full test, the live stream platform available to YouTube users. This was a total success because someone joined in the chat and asked about Eric Weinstein because he had seen my presentations, at least one, on Eric's escapade, which was covered by Kurt Jai Mongol. I believe that's probably the video that man watched, and he said that he agreed with everything that I said, which is always a congenial comment to hear if you're producing science. You don't really want to be making mistakes, but we are human, we all make mistakes. What I'm producing today at this time is somewhat improvised, it's somewhat impromptu, based on a search that I did to find out what was Eric Weinstein's reaction to Kurt Jai Mongol's perfect exposition on GU, which I call anti-GU because it's not anything like what the title says it is. And that's a touchstone that I would like to extrapolate on. That you're getting things that are named according to what you're supposed to be hearing, but they are not at all what they're named. They're an entirely different agenda having nothing to do with science. The nature of science is such that it is important for any individual approaching science or the scientific community to be aware of yourself. You need to know who you are first. And at no time in history was it more important to be aware of your own position as an individual human being approaching the modern environment called science. What is science and why do humans study it? What I attempt to do on my video platform is to expose what I call true science. But you see, as soon as you distinguish yourself that way, it's kind of a left-handed compliment, is it not? I'm saying that I produce true science. That implies that there's such a thing as false science. I think we all know that there is such a thing, but how prevalent is it? How aware are you of the difference between true science and, I'll just say, lesser versions of true science? Is that a valid or rational classificational approach? According to my view, pardon my hiccups, but I have asthma and these allergies are just really running roughshod over me. But I'm in good health otherwise. I just have to apologize. I noticed that I kind of hiccup. And that's because of a sneezing reaction trying to set in. I'm sorry. But it is kind of funny. It's fun. I really enjoy life. I always have. I'm 70 and a third years old, and I was not always a true scientist. Although that exposes the weakness, I believe, in my personal definition of true science, due to my present admission that I wasn't always a true scientist. The reason I make that assertion, that I wasn't always a true scientist, is because of a conscious decision I made approximately 16 years ago. Before which, and that would be at the age of about 54, before that changing event in my life, the decision to pursue true science, I was pursuing true religion, which you would have to say at the outset is quite a bit different from true science. But here is where my classificational system shows its flaw, in my opinion. Now, you may fully agree with me, and I would expect that you might, that religion cannot be directly related to science except on a contrast that they have two different frames of reference, essentially. Or you could say two different something. What would be then religion and what would be science? I want to introduce my opinion of that by saying that in retrospect, now at the tender age of 70, I look back on my life, whose first half was devoted to the Bible. I was a scriptural scholar, and I say on my own recognizance, without offering any direct proof, that I was very good at it. And that requires some kind of standard against which my opinion even of myself must be weighed. I believe in truth, and I believe that that is the right place to begin the classification of religion and science. How are those two separate categories of human endeavor related to truth? What is truth? Now, those of you who may have been exposed at some time to New Testament scriptures may recognize that that was a question that was asked in the 1st century AD to the man after whom AD is essentially named. Anno Domini means the year of our Lord, and BC means before Christ. That has been changed officially so that it's no longer standard to refer to calendar chronology by AD and BC, although before the Christian era is how BC was renamed, and as for AD, I'm not sure what it is, but it's not Anno Domini, which of course is Latin for the year of our Lord. So truth is ostensibly what we all seek somehow, but it does appear that there are two avenues open to truth. I would say so, but I would like to elaborate on that because now is the time to expose the framework. So to complete that thought, I wish to state that religion can be a form of science by a pretty good definition, that it's seeking truth, but not particularly by the methodology of science. And science could be called religious. It has a religious aspect because men are seeking the truth of the universe using the scientific method and the scientific process. What is the difference? That would be the place to start. What is the fundamental difference between the two approaches to truth? For most of human history, as men have sought to understand their environment, which would include the universe as well as the surface of the earth and the world, which would be the world of people, really, three different realms. We have the earth, which is obviously a planet, and it has an ecology, and it seems to be unique. Then among the creatures of earth, of which there are millions of species, there is man who is utterly different. Utterly different. The only animal that does not speciate. But I'd like to add something to the mix there to give you something to think about, because I always like to impart valuable information which you might not be fully aware of, which is the fact that instead of speciating, the human is often said the human is a species, and that is proper because of the DNA transmission sequence. It's exactly the same as that for animals, and in fact for plants. So DNA is the fundament of how we identify ourselves as humans in the scientific biological sense of what are we. Now humans don't speciate, but we phenotypicate, which is a form of distribution that is quite similar to speciation, but it's not a change in the genome. And that word is a word that I have developed to have a specific meaning that's most useful. The genome, if you look it up, has certain meanings, But the way I use genome is simply the locked code that defines the species. So in that sense, humans are a species because we cannot interbreed with any other species. And that's a pretty good definition of species. They don't interbreed. But do they change into each other? Now, according to Darwin's theory, that is possible because it looks like they do. So the prima facie, Darwin has a very good point of view that's worth exploring scientifically. But he did not know what DNA was. So the theory of speciation, which is accredited to Darwin well enough, it's hard sometimes to identify who is the legitimate discoverer because there's a certain amount of prestige involved in being a discoverer. But really, I'll just say almost any discovery in science is not the result of one man's work, but it is the result of one man's mind making a synthesis, which constitutes a discovery, of course. You've synthesized the knowledge that you gained from the universe into a rational system called understanding. It's quite an interesting term. Now, in the pursuit of truth, you might ask the question, well, what is truth? That's a very scientific question, but it's not always phrased in the context in which you would expect a scientific answer. For instance, in a Bible study group, for instance, which I engage in often enough, the question of what is truth would probably not be interpreted as a scientifically phrased question. It would be more like, what is the truth you learned, however you learned it? And that is the difference, in my opinion, that in religion, you're not restricted to that which can be absolutely proved by the scientific method. And I would have to say, without attempting to attach a statistical number to each side, I would have to say that religion is more open to the truth, simply because it's not restricted the way science is. But there is a huge trade-off, and I'm sure you're aware of it, so I'm sure you're expecting me to give the other side. Science has a tremendous advantage over religion. You have to define it quite carefully, though, and especially today. This is the reason for my present video presentation right now into the evening of Saturday, May 10th, 2025. You are certainly aware, if you are, for instance, a YouTube aficionado, as I certainly am, and you are curious about scientific facts and opinions. Those would be laws and theories. Bit difficult to distinguish these days, and there's your first clue. I want to say at the outset that this situation has always existed. It's persisted throughout human time. There were ancient scientists, of course, who were quite highly valued by their governments for their ability to learn things about nature that could be good for the society and, truly speaking, for the government. And governments are entities, although they're not strictly speaking human. They're group mind phenomena composed of many men's minds. So I'm putting out a lot of thoughts here at once in order to show you the best perspective, in my opinion, on what you're seeing on YouTube and the internet in general. I would extend it all the way to the universities and books. That what you're getting is not precisely science, which is a blanketing statement that could be challenged and should be challenged because there are two sides. I do believe in the scientific method, and I understand the scientific process well enough to be in favor of that as well. It has known proved advantages for humans in their daily lives. We are ordinarily, certainly as Westerners or Americans, aware of our advantages from science through technology, giving us everything from refrigerators to cars to rockets, etc. The harnessing of electricity was a major turning point in human history, and that was just a little over a century ago, really. So we've come a long way in the last century, and my life overlaps that century by about 2/3. I was born in 1954. I was not born into a religious family, although I never, speaking honestly and truly from my heart, I never saw my parents as being hypocritical in the slightest degree, with the usual exceptions because we're hypersensitive, especially as children, to our parents and what they do. And we all know they're human. You have to accept that. That's part of the human equation, a term I very much favor. The human equation begins in youth, where we're totally helpless and we are dominated by our environment, beginning at our parents, but going to the educational system, whatever that might be, at that phase of history for that society. And I say that I was not raised into a religious family, although that is not quite fair, because my mother was religious, certainly enough to put out the baby Jesus manger scene every Christmas. And she taught us to pray at night. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. She never explained what that meant. But if I die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. I call that religion. You can't prove that. What if there's no one listening? That's called atheism. And atheism is something you're going to hear about very often from now on if you have not heard of it already. It's been around for well over 70 years now. I'll just say in the most prominent position in science. That science came up against religion, and I've covered that in some recent videos. The true story of Charles Darwin is something that you simply are not allowed to know, which is again a provocative statement. Who would hide that information from you? The group mind, which can't be traced. So it is a sort of a conspiracy theory. I don't favor that. I mention it because it's true. So atheism is anti-religion, and scientists today are entirely 100% anti-religious, and they say so now. They never used to be able to say that and get away with it because society, which is a statistical entity, doesn't have perfect reality, but statistics don't exactly lie. They show you trends. And the trend is quite clear that there used to be such a thing as religion. And you could say and should say it still exists. Certainly it does. There are religious people. There are religious points of view. There is religion, certainly in the world. The Islam people are religious people. And I think still today, most people in the world, if you ask them if they were religious, would say yes. If you ask them what they meant by that, and were able to probe in a congenial fashion to find out, indeed, you're curious what they mean by that, you're not trying to hurt them or challenge them, they'll be forthright and tell you that they believe in some deity. It really makes sense to believe in a deity. Does that make sense in science? Does it make sense? If you say that you're a logician, a logical person, a rational, logical scientist who only accepts provable facts to state anything about reality in any way, would you be willing to admit that perhaps there's something supernatural? For instance, and obviously the most important difference, is there a supreme entity? You could say supernatural. That would be the scientifically more accurate way of identifying this consciousness. this entity, this being? Is there such a being? Modern scientists are absolutely unanimous on this now, but I shouldn't say absolutely. There is a remainder. But by and large, the ones you see, the scientists to whom you are exposed, would to a man, with perhaps 1 out of 100 exceptions, there should be exceptions, and thank God there still are, but to a man, will assert, and I believe most of these men now would pass a lie detector test. They're absolutely against the idea of God. They hate religion. They despise it. And there's a motivating factor involved. Because isn't that just a rather ridiculous red herring, sort of a subjective voice from your soul that, well, you hate God, or you hate religion, or you don't trust religion, or maybe you hate religious people, you're probably traumatized in your youth. Is it reasonable to assert that you're an atheist, that you're taking a stand, that that's what you're saying, that the reason you pursue science is to get rid of God, so that God does not compete with science? That was Charles Darwin's problem, and he did not want to publish because he knew he would be attacked by the Anglicans. You can always read the book that I've recommended several times over the past couple of years. Tom Wolfe's last book was on science. It was on Darwinism. And he's a top-notch journalist, I think one of the best, certainly in his class. He's just a world-class journalist. Excellent information, very well presented. But he never wrote a book on science until his very last book, which was on Darwinism. You must read that book. I rarely tout or promote a book or even a video, or more often a man, but not commonly. I don't believe in that unless it pertains to human pursuit of truth. And that's why I say you must read Tom Wolfe's book, The Kingdom of Speech. All right, so now I've said my piece there. Let's return to the subject of truth and science and religion, which are now set at loggerheads. Now, in a way, they always were. You can remember from schooling learning about Galileo. What you may not know about Galileo, other than that he was persecuted by a merciless church, which had all power to kill him. If he said the wrong thing, they would kill him. Nothing could stop that. But he wasn't afraid, and we admire him for that. But did you know that he sold his telescope to the Navy? He served the government. You virtually have to. You had to then, you have to now, or you don't survive. That's also not perfectly true. There are some men, certainly I remember in the 60s and 70s, hearing about groups of men, and whenever I say men, I always am including women. It's just easier just to say men. That they would form co-ops and go by a farm, and they would work together. They were often called hippies, but that was just one branch of the hippie movement. And men, even young men, even very young men, could go relatively free, could experience freedom of thought, freedom of expression, all the values that a true human values. It's not limited to democracy. That's a political system that does, in fact, encourage, at least, or it used to, or ideally it does. It's better than any system of politics that's been found so far, with obviously the same exact fatal flaws. So nothing has really changed since the time of Galileo. And before Galileo, men were burned at the stake for saying things like there are probably other civilizations in the universe. The reason that was a deadly thing to say from the point of the view of the church, is that everything in that religion was based on the Pope, which is a remarkable inversion of the message of Christianity. There should not be any such thing as a Pope. Well, there is, because men are religious and they want a guide. We need some kind of perspective and orientation to guide our lives. Does religion supply that? History at least attests that that has been the main endeavor, is to address the supernatural, which essentially, when you extend it into a scientific point of view, is an attempt to understand the sky, an attempt to understand what we cannot reach, because there is a physical parallel with supernaturality, which is the infinite extent of space. And it was always known to be infinite, at least in one sense. You could not rule out the possibility that those stars that we see are not just out there revolving around the earth, but that those stars go on for a tremendous distance, possibly. And then we use the term forever, which is a temporal term, which I find remarkable. Now, all of this is to approach the definition of truth. And here's what I would like to introduce to your thought pattern, which you might not be aware of, but I believe it, once you are aware of it, you'll enjoy this little anecdote. It is from the Bible. So a man, it was either Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, they all gave a vignette of Yeshua's life, who was a contemporary with all four of those gospel document writers, however that happened. And on the day before Yeshua's murder at the hands of his government, which I'm sure you've heard of, the crucifixion, he was tried in two courts of law. One of them was the Zionist regime, which was a puppet state of Rome at the time, but they were tolerated. So Yeshua was tried by the high priest, whose name I believe was Caiaphas. And Caiaphas just simply found him guilty and sent him on to the Romans. He himself did not have the power. The Sanhedrin, which he represented, the governing body of the puppet state of Zionism at the time, he had no authority to have Jesus killed. So he sent Jesus on to the Roman prelate, or whatever it's called, in a foreign land, an occupied country of the Roman Empire. That was Israel at the time. Actually not Israel, but Judah, the only surviving tribe, except for the Benjis, after whom, but I won't go on, you may already know. He was asked a question by Pilate, who had the power of life and death over the man at that moment. And this was in the presence of witnesses, obviously. And Yeshua, whom Americans call Jesus in the American English language, he was asked a question by Caiaphas. And there's a background story to this that you might be interested in checking, but I won't go into that depth here. That Caiaphas asked Yeshua a most important question, and we can't say for sure if Caiaphas knew what he was doing, but it can be surmised that Caiaphas wanted to let Yeshua off the hook, that he saw no fault with this man. I believe he even said so. But he ended up saying, well, according to your law, he must die, so take him away. So Caiaphas asked one last question of Yeshua, the end of Yeshua's trial, after which he was beaten for hours with a bag over his head by Roman soldiers who knew exactly how to torture a man without killing him. So he was beaten, and then he was led out with his crown of thorns to be nailed up in front of his people on Passover Day, the holiest day in Jewish law. and then he died on the cross. But what was the question that Caiaphas asked him, which might have gotten Yeshua off the hook? We cannot say for sure, but it is a possibility based on the background story. He asked, "What is truth?" Which in Latin I would suppose is also 3 words, but I've never learned Latin, although I did learn Greek and Hebrew in order to study the Bible, not to be able to speak either language, but to read certain words, phrases, and sentences which I wanted to know in the original language. This question, what is truth, is the question I'm raising to you. It's our question if we wish to approach it. But can you even guess, if you don't already know, how Yeshua responded? Yeshua was constantly being asked questions throughout his ministry because he was recognized as a guide and probably a prophet. He gained 12 disciples, and we're not too sure how many men might have wanted to follow him as well, but he limited it to 12, including one very specially selected man named Judas, and his supposed last name, Iscariot, is not a name. It's a title, and it means he was a member of the Ishari. And that's quite an interesting study. Who was Judas Iscariot? Yeshua knew perfectly well who that man was, that man would end up betraying him because he's a Zionist spy. So one of his disciples was a Zionist spy who ended up betraying Yeshua to have him murdered. And that's what happened, but this was the last question that was addressed to Yeshua. My point being that he never dodged a question. In all of his recorded words, sayings, encounters, the questions that he was asked, he would answer. Sometimes to great satisfaction, sometimes to a disconcerted audience who did not get the answer they expected. And Yeshua was quite well balanced and knew how to answer questions. It is part of a guide's job to do that. But when he was asked by Caiaphas in front of witnesses on the day of his sentencing, what is truth, he could have answered in any number of ways, but do you know how he answered? He did not answer. It's the only question on record that Yeshua refused to answer. And it's entirely, in my opinion, a matter of speculation. Why Yeshua would not answer that most important question on the day of his sentencing. It's a remarkable answer in context that he didn't even open his mouth. And that's actually in prophetic scripture. He opened not his mouth, but was as a lamb being led to the slaughter. He knew what he was doing. And so he was an extraordinary man in my opinion, in pretty much every way. He was a unique man. The day of Passover, Yeshua was certainly not born in December, and the day we selected is December 25th to celebrate his birthday is patent nonsense. It's an invention of the Catholic Church, essentially. But when was he born? In spring. He was possibly born near Passover, so it was near his birthday. This is the most famous man in Israel at the time, which was still called, I believe, at least by the Zionists, they still called it Israel. Israel was actually gone by then. There was no such thing as Israel any longer, and never will be again. Which raises an interesting question about that little patch of land at the eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea that's called Israel. Well, if it were going to be called anything reasonable, it would be called Yehuda, or Judah. That would be the proper name for that country. But without going into the political or world political scene at this moment, I want to focus on Yeshua's refusal to answer. He did not answer the question, what is truth? I leave it at that because I believe that is the message, and it's up to every man or any man to interpret just why he would not answer. But I've tried to give you my reasoning, at least, for why he didn't answer. It's because he might have gotten himself off the hook, which he did not want. He was being led to the slaughter like a peaceful lamb, and he never fussed. He went right to the cross, was nailed up in the most hideous fashion of murder, or killing if it's legal, but that's not a legal form of killing. It's strict out and out murder. It was a Roman invention, so it wasn't, if the Sanhedrin had gotten their way, if they had been given permission to try Yeshua, he most likely would have been stoned to death, meaning with stones. There's a new meaning of stoned, which is much more congenial to me, but it has nothing to do with rocks, okay? And yeah, there's a lot of levity involved there, there's some puns. Now, the point I'm trying to make is a somewhat complexified point, that there is such a thing as religion. And I don't think a rational man, no matter how scientific or logical or exclusive he thinks he is or has made himself, no man has the right to challenge religion scientifically. Because why would you even do that? People who have religious points of view are not consciously using strict logic. They're using some kind of rationality to make sense of their environment, but they're not looking for measurements and scientific proofs of theories. In the same way, they're using a different method. I believe it's necessary now for every rational man to concentrate on that because of what's happening, I'll just say, on YouTube. Because that platform has now grown into an entity that needs analysis. It's not that you or I or anybody will be able to change it, but we do work within it, although it may be far at the periphery, where a rational man, such as I bill myself to be for, I think, very good reason, I do attempt strictly to follow logic. I am not promoting religion in the same way that I used to, but here's where I want to give you my own point of view, such as it may be of any importance to you. I think it's important for a man to be forthright and forthcoming as a scientist, to state as clearly as he can, how do you regard religion? I think it's absolutely critical to find that out right away before you even engage a man in conversation on a scientific, rational basis. That one of the first things you should determine between each other, it's mutual. Where do you stand on religion? But again, it should be congenial. It's not to set up a trap or to attack or abuse the person or belittle them or try to establish a hierarchy. Oh, well, we were equal, but you believe in religion? Oh, nothing like that. Simply to get the truth out of the man. Because you're dealing with a man. Yes, he says he represents general relativity, or he represents astrophysics, or he represents mathematics, or he represents a model or a theory, or that's very important, but you also have to know the man. And that's not something you can do quickly. You befriend the man if you want to get to know him, and it takes weeks, months, years, maybe a whole lifetime. Of course, it's an open-ended interchange, an open-ended intercourse between men to get to know each other. So this question could be considered delicate. I do not believe it should be treated as a delicate question, except in the most moral upstanding, logical way, what do you think about religion? Where do you stand with respect to religion? My answer at this moment of my life, I will admit, or I will confess, or I will state, whether it can be proved or not, that I've always had the same attitude both towards religion and towards science. So I give my own answer as an example, which I think is at least an index of the type of answer you might get. Because when you ask a question of that nature, in that context, where do you stand on religion? How do you feel about religion? The answer could be that I love it, I'm devoted to it, I have my own point of view on that, which dominates my life, but not as a scientist. I would say, well, let's continue, that's fine. I would consider that to be among the best answers. But today, that's not the answer you'll get ever. You'll never get that answer. And there are reasons for that which are rather troubling, in my opinion. Why would a man who's presented with that question, in whatever context, perhaps even just indirectly, why would that man say, I am an atheist? They all do. All of them do. All scientists now, American scientists, Western scientists, they're atheists. Hugely predominant. That was not the case in Newton's day. It was not the case in James Clerk Maxwell's day. And by the time of Einstein, things had begun to accelerate in human affairs at all levels because of the sudden increase in the number of people, but the simultaneous advancements in technology, that men realized that they were onto something really good. This is far beyond the days of Galileo, who got his telescope from the Netherlands and improved it. So he deserves credit for having invented the telescope, although once again, as I said at the outset, it's somewhat difficult to assign any man a discovery, because Galileo, whatever he did, based his work on the telescope, on a prototype which worked. So he didn't invent it in that sense, but he certainly perfected it. It's rather the same with Archimedes having used the calculus in a primitive form. Did he invent the calculus? You could say so, but I believe that that's not the best answer. Newton invented it. You could say Leibniz did too, and I've given presentations on that because you can't leave out Leibniz because he got the other side of the calculus. One of them concentrated more on the infinitesimal, and the other one concentrated more on the integral, but they go together because the calculus, the fundamental law of calculus is that it's invertible. That's actually untrue, but I've given presentations on the calculus as well as on the complex number system, which nobody watches. I've gotten likes. I've had as many as 50 or 70 views on a video, but nothing comes of it. It's because I'm sidelined, and there are natural reasons for that. I'm not expressing sour grapes, although these days I kind of am, because the situation has become critical for me, and I have valid reasons for saying so, but you see, so do these trolls. This man, EW, I'll just give his initials, EW. If you don't know who he is, it doesn't matter because he's a nobody, but he's a very, very famous nobody now. And he has what he says is the answer. But there are thousands of these men who keep saying that they have an answer or the answer, but when you check, they don't. And this is just, to me, a remarkable situation. It's a statistical change in the public view of what science is. Well, I'll be frank with you. I'll just state it in a word. It's diversion, it's entertainment. It has nothing to do with science except capitalizing on the curiosity that we all have about the universe. Well, the universe, would that include a supernatural deity? A designer is the scientific name for that consciousness. It certainly can be proved to exist. There is a designer, there is a God, there is a supreme being. There is no question about that. But does it belong in science? Should you mention it in science ever? Well, to answer that question reasonably, knowing that it's going to cause a rift, you could either say yes or no. That science, of course, includes any rational deduction. If you can prove that there's a designer, then there is, according to science. If you can prove it, then, unless the proof is wrong, there's a designer. Has that been proved? Absolutely. It's always been known. But you see, it hasn't been provable until very recently. That could be argued that the existence of a supreme designer, a conscious being that's supernatural, has a decided effect on the human consciousness is just considering that. But is it scientific? I leave that open because the evidence for a supreme designer, a conscious supernatural being, is everywhere obvious. Everywhere obvious. The interaction of the plants and animals, you can go on with a list of tens of thousands of cumulative pieces of evidence showing that there's a design. I insist, and I will state forthrightly, point blankly, and I will debate this, if necessary, in a proper forum, conducted well with an arbiter that both sides agree is a good arbiter. That's very difficult to achieve. But in a ideal, positively oriented debate, I would certainly take the side that the existence of what is commonly called God is a dead certainty, and it's the only certain fact that we have. It's the basis of science itself, and I have rigorously proved that. So in my mind, there is no doubt that science is religion. Is religion science? You can't say the same thing there. But if I'm making an identity, it should be invertible if it's an identity. Otherwise, you have to say it's non-commutative or something like that. It doesn't work both ways. So when I say that science is religion, I'm putting religion above science, where it must be, because it's the basis of science. So then it then becomes a necessity in science to rigorously prove the existence of a designer. I believe it's self-evident, but that does not constitute a proof just to say that, except by raising your voice, which I do these days, and I know I shouldn't. It's emotional. It's very difficult to evade the emotional content because we're looking for guidance for our lives. Well, if you don't have a guide, I'm just going to tell you, you're probably in bad shape. Every man needs a guide. If you don't have one, you're lost. You're simply going to live out a typical human life, which may or may not be good from your point of view or anyone else's, but you will live out a normal, a regular life. But don't you need orientation to guide your life? You have a future. You know what your past was, but you could also see that you have a future. You need orientation. Well, without a guide, you don't have any. You'll have to figure it out yourself. And a lot of men have claimed or have shown that they've at least tried. But is that valid? No, the only valid point of view of a scientifically rational man, such as I bill myself to be, I want to be a guide. Well, already, there's some subjectivity involved there. I may be somewhat narcissistic in wanting that. What, I just want attention, perhaps? If you're being a guide, you want attention. Maybe you want disciples. I don't claim to want disciples, I'm not saying. But let's say now that I'm a scientist, and I've proved that I'm trying hard and that I'm doing my best. Whether it's sufficient or not, I don't know if any man can evaluate, but you're trying. I'm trying to be a rational, logical scientist. Well, what if you make a discovery? Now, many men, of course, many men have made discoveries, although it's difficult to attach a name to a discovery because in science you're not looking for the man. You're looking for what he discovered that can be proved, and thereby it becomes common property. You discover how electricity works, you might get rich. So there is motivation either to be a religious person, you may be seeking, comfort in some way. It's a very human occupation. We do naturally want to be together. Well, you have to have some commonality. It could be religious. That's served humanity fairly well for about 6,000 years, is you have some conception of there being a designer. Most often called a creator, if you want to use a more technical term, but it is a being, a consciousness, a superhuman entity. Was it superhuman? Well, it would have to be superhuman at least. But then we as humans would project onto the deity whatever we know of ourselves. In order to correspond with the deity, there must be something connecting us. Well, that's religion. You're searching for that. Can you do so in science? Well, you certainly are not blocked from doing that, but it's much more restrictive in science. You have to prove everything you say. You can't just say, well, it's obvious that there's a creator. You might point to various things as evidence. That's what a scientist would do, but you're probably not going to convince anybody who's already set their mind against it. It's not an open forum. At any moment in a man's lifetime, he has to reassert what it is he's doing, because it changes. You might be irreligious one day and religious the next, and there have been cases of the opposite, where a man who was religious all his life just suddenly saw through the sham and turned to science. Well, that's really what's happening. So science is kind of a lifeboat, seen very abstractly though, because what are we as humans? Well, that's like asking what is truth. Can you even answer it? Should you answer it? I believe, yes, a scientist should answer any and every question that's rationally posed. Similarly to Yeshua himself. Well, there may come a day when you find yourself betrayed and you don't have any more friends. All your sheep have scattered. Whatever you had in the way of support is gone. You're alone. You're cornered. And you're nailed up. You're murdered. Well, in modern society, people aren't tacked up to a cross. It's not even like a prison sentence. It's more of just sidelining, ostracism. You're not part of science if you believe in God. Is that a proper attitude? I think you know my opinion. It's a wholly improper attitude. No scientist should make any statement about religion unless it's in support of religion, but you're never against it. That's almost insane. I believe it actually is a sign of psychopathic delusion, that you would say that you're an atheist. Well, that means that you know who God is and you reject him. That's what an atheist is. I have considered the idea of a supreme designer, a creator, a supernatural being. And I absolutely deny it. Well, you have to prove that. That's what's being done throughout YouTube society. And in conclusion, to wrap this up blessedly in under an hour, it's already run. I talk a lot these days. It really is my life to communicate. So I hope you forgive me for going on and on. I hope I haven't bored you. But I do wish to make an extremely important point that I know will help you. I do attempt to be a guide to your life. So I am trying to be some kind of authority figure in your life. But if you trust the man, you're not a scientist. So I'm not asking you to trust me. What I'm asking now that I have made the most important series of discoveries in the history of science, that you pay attention, give me some feedback, start engaging me, and promote me. And if you find that you can't promote me because you simply disagree with me, go your way. But if you examine what I've discovered, it's nothing at all like what's out on YouTube being promoted as another breakthrough. We solved the quantum paradox. We know what aliens are. We're doing this. Oh, the supermassive black hole. If you only knew this, you'd know everything. Thousands of times a day. Which, if you check them, just a sample, they never are telling the truth. Not ever. They want you to watch them. And that's not science. I'm sorry. You could start with Joe Rogan. Well, he's not a scientist. He interviews scientists because it gets him a lot of views. Because you're still curious about the universe. But you don't have a guide. Well, I'm going to tell you point blank who your guide is now. It's Kurt Jaimungal. Because he'll show you in excruciating detail so that you can't deny it, that there is no hope for science any longer. Kurt Jaimungal is basically the greatest anti-science proponent, and I fully support him, because it's false science, it's pseudoscience, it's fake science, it's deadly science. It's not science. It's something much worse. It's the opposite of science. It's to make sure you never find a guide. But the one you're going to get instead, you're going to have to select very carefully. I give you two choices. I leave out Grant Sanderson. Obviously, I leave out Lex Friedman. These are just circus carnival actors. That's all they are. But Kurt Jaimungal has something on the money. Okay? He engaged the anti-GU theory that was developed by EW. And those are your only two choices now for your guide. It's either going to be EW, whose name I refuse to spell out anymore because I don't want to promote his name. But he is there, and you'll know who I mean, because he is the subject of Kurt Jaimungal's 3-hour presentation of anti-GU theory, by which I mean that the proponent of that theory is an absolute traitor to you and everybody else. Whom does EW serve? I've stated exactly what that is, but it's not friendly at all. It's not friendly at all. So what does Kurt Jaimungal have on the ball? It's that he took this theory, which cannot be understood by a human being, and he proved that if you try to understand it, you will find out exactly what I just said. It cannot be understood. And that's general relativity, that cannot be understood. Quantum mechanics, that cannot be understood. The black hole, or supermassive black hole phenomenon, as it has been measured thus far, cannot be understood the way it's presented. The model is wrong. The BB, another stupid term I won't spell out anymore because I don't want to promote it as a thought in your mind. The BB is pure shit. And then there's natural selection, which states that there is no God because you come from mud. And that's really what it says. That life came from nothingness because there is no designer. That's what natural selection states, according to the modern interpretation of Darwin's theory. There is no designer. Quantum mechanics is being promoted now as saying that the universe is tricking us, so there's something strange involved, and that's where it leaves off. Everything is strange, misunderstood, non-understandable, deceptive, and will lead to endless psychosis with no answers. That is anti-science. So I promote my channel and myself as a guide as one of the last scientists that is capable of being a true scientist, which is a guide to your life so that you can wake up and be happy and go on to the next level. And I'm going to leave off with this warning. You are going to die. Have you addressed that yet? Now's the time. Tune in to my station. Keep watching me. And don't watch them. If you want to know why you shouldn't watch them, I direct you to exactly one video. Kurt Mungel's dissection of one of the strangest notions that's ever entered into the poisoned mind of man. The way it's promoted, the way E.W. rose to his position of prominence, is picked apart by Kurt Mungel in terms you will be unable to avoid, that you won't understand a single goddamn sentence in 3 hours of superb presentation of what the theory says. Kurt Mungel asserts, and he has affirmed this is what he meant to say, the theory is shit. All the theories you're getting are shit. Quantum mechanics is shit. General relativity is shit. And each one of those strange assertions can be backed up to the hilt. Only I have the truth now. So there's my statement. I will be promoting the scientific and religious truth that you must know, or you will be lost in the most hideous fashion. And that's Anagalactic, bringing you the secrets of the universe on this Saturday, the 10th of May 2025, after having produced my first live stream presentation. I will continue those, but now you know what I'm after. I want you to go free. I want you to get what you need. You're not going to get it from Eric, and you're really not going to get it from Kurt either. But if you see what Kurt is trying to expose very scientifically, you're being fed shit. And that's the whole YouTube platform, is anti-scientific, anti-religious bullshit to keep you distracted. You can always turn back to your videos of music. I recommend strongly that you don't do that anymore. As recreation, you may need some. Don't do music videos any longer. You don't have time. You have to listen to me now, or you're sunk. Keep looking up. It is a full moon, a beautiful time. As soon as I press stop recording, I'm going to step outside and look at the full moon, knowing that it could be my last day on Earth. I made it. You haven't. You need me. Tune in. You won't regret it. I'll give you all the answers.